This talk is called the Alternative General Church. No, it's called the Traditional General Church and the Alternative General Church. And it's about how I see the two being connected. And as I said before you came in, Dorothy, it is dedicated to my mother, who's turning 90 years old today. My mother is Simonetti, and she is a scholar in the church and has given presentations and written articles about widening the view of the new church, and especially the general church. And so she's very much in favor of what I'm doing right now. All right, so 2 years ago I resigned from the general church. And, you know, people said things like, oh, can't you work from within the organization? And I said things like, oh, well, I haven't left the community. And so what I realize now is that I haven't left the alternative general church. I've only left the traditional new church. And these posters that I have up here have some material about some characteristics of the traditional general church, some characteristics of the alternative general church, and those two are sort of key to each other. And then this one has alternative cultural sources. This one has activities, events, and publications that are part of the alternative general church. And I'm doing the documentation of the alternative general church because there's plenty of documentation of the traditional. But what I realized is that I have loads of material to document it. I have on the table, you'll see Town Council newsletter, which after a lapse of 30 years, I've just seen as a totally visionary publication. And Voice, which is the Caritas newsletter, and I'll be talking about what Caritas is. Out of Silence, which was an annual newsletter about people who have undergone sexual abuse. And just one copy of the Psychosynthesis newsletter, which isn't really, it's not really general church, but it's something that I grew up with. This is a personal talk. This is about how I experienced, looking back, how I experienced the traditional and the alternative general church growing up. And how, growing up in my parents' household, I saw my mom and dad engaging in activities and reading books that had to do with what I'm now calling the alternative general church. And so, on the table I have Peter Rhodes's AIM, Connections and Connections To, from the Women's Symposia, and Rosalind's book that she edited, Healing Words, A Sampler of Holiness Theology, and a couple of other books that were very influential, which I'll get to later. So I want to also add that this bifurcation that I see in the traditional and the alternative is something that's actually common to a lot of Christian churches in this country, I believe. Like there are people who say, let's be more inclusive, let's be less rigid, let's be less exclusive. And then the other people are saying, no, that's part of who we are. So this is a tension that has been a part of a lot of Christian churches, and it has a particular flavor in the general church. And also, I want to make sure that you know that my perspective on this is based on vernacular. So I have the word vernacular flavored on this poster. So if anybody feels like I'm not including something that they experienced in another society, it's because I'm talking about vernacular. So, let's see. Right, now, and the relationship between the two is not symmetrical. It's not like they're not two side-by-side boxes. They have a lot of influence on each other. The traditional general church is like the parent. The alternative general church is often like a rebellious teenager. I think in literal ways. So, and so some of you have received the the document that I sent, which this is based on, and the posters that I made are based on the document, but they're somewhat different. So I thought I'd like to have people tell me what they think is on these posters, if you want. So what are some characteristics that you see that the traditional general church has?
Would authority be one?
So I would say for authority, we have, what is God telling you in the Word? Is, I would say, the primary question that is being asked of us in the traditional general church. And then in the alternative general church, there's more of a, what is God telling you in your heart? Now, these are not mutually exclusive, and they're not also exclusive to one another. They both have both. But the traditional general church, I think, is more focused on what the Lord tells us in the Word. The alternative is more about what God tells us in our hearts. And someone I talked to asked me, well, what if you have the Word in your heart? I'm like, yeah, we hope we have the Word in our hearts. But in many times, in many cases, there are things that we read in the Word that are different, that are sometimes in conflict with what our hearts are telling us. So the question is, when there's a conflict between the two, which do you choose? So, does anybody else want to give me a
hazard a guess?
Yes.
One of my guiding lights is doctrinal differences don't need to divide. If people would look at each other and say, that's my brother or sister, they love the Lord, and if people did that, having the dissent immediately. I guess I feel like in the general church I was told what the Word says in my heart, my teachers and stuff. Not looking at the doctrinal differences as the millions of facets of a beautiful heaven. Yeah. But everybody sees different.
So, Ken?
The traditional church tends to be keeper of the books, in a sense, the business sense as well as the religious sense. And it's not unique for an organization to do that, but we do it with a very small number of people who do take upon themselves power and hierarchy because they feel they have to.
Yeah. Well, here we have the writings are universally literally true is a traditional point of view. And doctrinal purity is a watchword. And I think that's related to keeper of the books. All we need for regeneration is in the writings. Then I have this doctrinal study, and that's to suggest that often when there's a question in the church as to what our policy should be, the first thing to do is, let's do a doctrinal study. And it's like, I don't want to make it sound like that's a silly thing to do, because it's not. But it seems like people are going to the doctrines for things that aren't really matters of doctrine sometimes. And it's like, I even remember, I think, when the contemporary or the informal services were started, some of the reading that I've done recently suggested that there were some ministers who wanted to put a pause on the informal service until they done a doctrinal study. But that's not what happened, unfortunately. When I was on the General Church Board, there was actually people wanted to say, let's go and create a definition of worship so that we can decide whether to support something as worship in the General Church. And I said, please don't. Please don't do that. Because worship can take so many different forms. So in contrast to that, I've got the writings are influenced by culture. People look at the writings in different ways. They take them more or less literally. And, let's see what I've got over here. Oh, yes. Adapted. I put down adapted doctrine here, but I originally had usable doctrine. I was trying to figure out a sort of a counterpart to doctrinal purity. And I had doctrinal integration on the file, but it seemed like an awfully long word to fit into the poster. So I've got adapted doctrine there. And that sort of relates to what you're saying, Dorothy, about about how doctrinal differences don't need to divide. Oh, here we go. Mistakes can be corrected. That's another thing that's important. I've got mistakes can be corrected over here. Yep. Here's one. Fear, if you don't do it right, something terrible may happen. That's, my mom would tell me a lot about how that was sort of in the atmosphere for her when she was a child. Not just because she was born, but also because of her mother, who was her mother was Florence Cooper Cranch, and was very fearful about people doing the wrong thing and terrible things happening. And there's history in my mom's family of very terrible things happening and people needing to find someone to blame.
Oh dear.
Why it's called atmosphere.
Atmosphere, because it's an atmosphere full of fear. Right. Yeah. I think I'm just gonna go ahead and reveal everything.
Okay.
Revelation here. Okay.
We're not very good guessers. We're sorry.
That's okay. I just want to give people a chance if they wanted to say something, and anytime you want to sing something out, go ahead. So I have for traditional and alternative, I have the traditional focuses on the individual spiritual journey, and the alternative general church tends to focus more on the communal spiritual journey, that we can help each other grow spiritually. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think that the way the traditional general church thinks that we can help each other grow spiritually tends to be very limited. Tends to be very limited. Like, oh yeah, we all go to church. Isn't that great? Out here. Oh yes. And we've got male clergy. And what I decided to call the conjugal culture, the whole thing about all the teachings about marriage and how important they are, and how, mistakes can't be corrected. Loss of virginity is a terrible, terrible thing.
Can I say something? I was talking to a girl back in the days when my friend and I were out of high school, but we weren't married yet, and we were talking about that, and she had had some history with boys and some experiences. And I was saying, what do we do? What do you do about that? And she says, I just really believe that innocence can be regained. So, like, mistakes can't be corrected over here, mistakes can be corrected over here. And then there's this beautiful wash of everything in between. And maybe there's two people who think mistakes can't be corrected.
There's a wonderful article in one of the old Big Apple journals, which I did not dig up for today, but it's by one of the more conservative ministers about the return of virginity. He said, if a girl has lost, because he was talking about girls, if a girl has lost her virginity, there are things that she can do to bring herself back into a state of virginity. And it was a short piece, and I really appreciated it. It's like, it's not all, like, I don't want to suggest that everything about the traditional general church is bad and everything about the alternative is good. But I don't want to pretend I'm not taking sides, because my feeling is that the alternative general church has been a needed corrective to some of the excesses of the traditional. And that when the traditional general church accepts that and embraces it, good things happen. And there have been times when the traditional general church has accepted and embraced the changes. So did you have something to say, Liz?
I did. I wondered if in that paper they talked about how a boy can regain his virginity. Or is sexism also on there somewhere?
Well, this was back in the 80s, and it was about girls.
Wow.
There was a lot more, and still is a lot more, concern about girls' virginity than boys' virginity.
That's too bad. We have a hand up on the Zoom. Lori?
Oh, tell me.
My experience of the difference between the two is that in the general church, some guy tells you what he wants you to believe God wants for you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's based on translations that are not necessarily accurate. And in the alternative church, we are encouraged to listen to what God actually wants for us, rather than what some guy thinks God might want for us, based on their misreading, based on the Green Book translations, which are hideous.
Right. All right, well, that relates
Thank you.
to what I have down on the bottom here, which is,
Oh, good.
there's, each of the different churches I'm talking about here is, and its own kind of arrogance. The humility before the authority of the word. Like, God is talking to us in the word, we have to listen, we have to obey, even if it's difficult. But then the arrogance is about the general church's unique excellence in how we've got the right interpretation. And as Lori is saying, some guy is telling us what we need to believe and what we need to do. And yeah, what I wanted to say about the whole thing is that I feel like even though the traditional church has the buildings and the organization and the money, that the alternative church is just as real and just as influential as the traditional general church, even though it doesn't have the trappings, and even though it doesn't always have access to the trappings. So then I have, oh yeah, and Melanie was talking about the arrogance thing. What did she put? Let me see how she put it. She put it, it's here. Arrogance about, hierarchically dominant interpretations of Scripture being correct and infallible. So I think that relates to what you're saying, Lori. Yeah. So we have that. And then we have over here in the, on the alternative side, we have humility before God's love and forgiveness. Isn't it wonderful? And the arrogance about having an open mind and about our own personal insights. And I feel like having our own personal insights and listening to them, it sounds like, oh, but are you saying that you're putting your own understanding above Swedenborg's or above the writings that in the writings? And it's like, well, sometimes yes. And it's like there's a wonderful response in one of those State Alpha journals from a general church minister who I admire because he's conservative and yet can disagree without attacking and without condemning and with respect. And he says, well, he's talking about this article that I put in, The Word of God in Swedenborg, Conversations about the Word of God in Swedenborg's Writings, which was a compilation put together from the what was originally the Women's Roles list and then became the Caritas list. And Lori, you're featured in that, and so is Michael. And people talking about, well, the writings say this and that, and how could we believe this? Especially things about racism, but also about sexism. And it's like, and so what this guy says in response is, weeding out the good from the bad ultimately calls into question any statement that is out of step with a person's thinking. That also leaves us with troubling epistemological questions. Is written revelation a valid source of reliable information about spiritual things? Can anything really be known with certainty about heavenly and spiritual things? And he talks about an unproductive uncertainty that can arise if you question the writings, if you question parts of the writings and later other parts of the writings. And I'm saying maybe the uncertainty is not unproductive. Maybe the certainty is unproductive and the uncertainty is productive. Slide this over. I've got uncertainty down there.
Okay.
Mhm.
And Linda, these two posters are activities that they do?
Okay, these two posters are cultural sources, some of which are on the table, publications, activities, and events. And then this is all the stuff that I couldn't fit on the first three posters.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it's not
All right.
really-
They're not compared to each other. All right.
So, I'll just go.
I have a hand in the Zoom. Kathy?
Oh, great.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, Linda. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah. So I have a couple comments, and I have two separate comments. So, yeah, because I'm on Zoom, I just want to use this time to make both comments. One is that I have been thinking recently if women were in charge of the traditional general church, how different would that look? Because I think what people don't always mention, I mean, it has been mentioned somewhat, but it is very patriarchal, and patriarchal traditional ideas have been interpreting the writings. What would it look like? I mean, and is there value to looking at what it would look like if it was literalistic interpretations of the writings from a female perspective? For instance, about childcare, like how literal can we get about how we have to take care of children and the elderly? And also, like, what if people were going to be literal about child abuse? Like, because there are statements in the Bible even about the death penalty for that. So, would there be a death penalty? I mean, if not only the general church, but say the United States had been matriarchal run, would child abuse be punishable by death at this point?
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'm trying to, say, okay, when we're thinking about literal interpretations versus alternative interpretations, can we, look at it, not just male, female, but it is highly colored by patriarchal versus matriarchal. And then the other thing is, I wonder how much this has to do with, like, political. I've read a lot about political differences, and this is a whole other topic, and we don't have to get into it, but supposedly conservatives have a very different value system than liberals do, just as, and I don't know if you can you see that?
Oh, yeah. I think I've seen that. That looks familiar.
And so this is, liberals tend to value these, can you read them?
No.
Harm and fairness, way more than these, whereas conservatives value them all around the same.
Mhm.
And what are the conservatives ones? Purity?
Purity, authority, and in-group. And I would say, actually, at this point, this was 15 years ago, this was Jonathan Page. And I would say in-group is becoming more of a liberal value. Just as far as, I mean, that's my take on it. I don't know. But anyway, when we're trying to have conversations with people in the traditional church, how much do we need to acknowledge they're just coming from a different set of principles, and we're going to keep repeating the same conversations if we keep talking about this, but we're not even addressing some of their other values.
Mhm.
Yeah, probably because we don't care about them, but oh well.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Right. I think we have to acknowledge that they're there, they'll end up there. For them, they are equally valuable. I think we have to acknowledge it and not say that they just don't care.
All right.
You know,
disagreements and acknowledgement, they don't need to divide us.
Okay.
And it feels like, to some people, it feels
Yeah.
like the alternative general church has tried to acknowledge and accommodate the values of the traditional, and that they haven't gotten the same response from the traditional. So that the traditional tends to be more intolerant of alternate views than the alternative, which is one of the differences.
The writings say that everyone who lives according to the system of beliefs they have embraced, even those who do not know of the existence of God, can go to heaven if they are living according to what they believe is right.
Okay.
So, I really struggle with the general church's approach to the LBTG, whatever community, all the initials, but
Except me.
people who are living according to what they believe is true and trying their best to be good people go to heaven.
There you go.
That's what we have here, God does not condemn. And I put
Okay.
that as one of the things that the alternative and the traditional have in common.
Oh, it's an in common poster.
Yes, but the traditional general church has not been stellar at really sending that message that God does not condemn, because people in the past and in the present have felt and feel condemned by God, and I'm going to come back to that, and by other people in the general church. It's like, oh yes, we got this.
Okay.
Giving up judgment.
Yeah, let's see all the poster stuff.
All right? Observe without judgment is one of the tools in the spiritual toolbox. And one of the people at Calm Council had that wonderful phrase that I love. That he said, when he judged, the judgment would slop over onto the people. Even though he was trying to only judge actions and not people, the judgment slopped over onto the people.
Yep.
And I just love that. It just makes me happy. So, as to what Kathy said, one thing I've noticed, and this isn't something that I put on the poster, but there's been a lot of emphasis about what the writing said, in Individual Love, I believe, about how men have certain jobs that they're suited to, and women have certain jobs that they're suited to. And there's been a lot more focus on what women shouldn't be allowed to do than about what men shouldn't be allowed to do. I mean, aside from, they shouldn't have to do all the child care, but like...
Can you clarify that? Is that like, are you talking about these days? People are...
Oh, yeah, they still do. Yeah, they still do. But it's more in the past. But people haven't said anything about, well, men shouldn't be attending childbirth or deathbeds. I never heard anyone say that.
Is that in Swedenborg?
Oh, it's just men have certain jobs that are that they're suitable for, and women have jobs that they're suitable for, and it's like there's been a lot of talk about what isn't proper, what isn't appropriate for women to do because of what Swedenborg said about that. So, yeah. So there was something else I was going to say in response to you, Kathy, but I have lost that thread. So yeah, let me just get these posters uncovered. Okay, now, I love what young May Morris said about toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing. When she gave her talk about trauma and religious response to trauma. And toxic positivity is pretending everything's okay and not sharing not sharing the negative stuff. And spiritual bypassing is if there's something wrong, if you're feeling sad or angry or fearful, then there's something wrong with you and you have to pray harder and read harder and try harder, and it's like you're not doing enough. The message is sometimes you're not praying enough. You're not reading the word enough. You're not trying hard enough if you're having these feelings. And, but in the alternative church, we have value feelings. Like, and I just feel like I need to say this, even though I feel like I shouldn't have to say it, that we don't value feelings as infallible guides to action. Like, if you feel anger, that doesn't mean you should take it out on people. But if you feel fear, it's like you have feelings and they're telling you something about what's going on inside you. And I have shared truth, and what I mean by that is share your own truth about what's going on inside of you. So that's part of more tools in the spiritual toolbox that people in the alternative general church, they find the writings useful, but they want something more to supplement that. And so I'm going to be talking about some of that on the third question.
Okay.
And then we have on the bottom, disagreement is discouraged. I have heard someone say that disagreement within the clergy, that if it's open, that's airing our dirty laundry. I've heard that said in the past year. And then we have, in the alternative, disagreements are okay. Well, that's what you said. We can disagree and we can still be a group. Now, I did want to talk about how the alternative general church came to be a force in our society, in Vernacular and in the general church. So we have cultural sources, Huber's Idow, and Rogers encounter groups, and that kind of activity was considered suspicious in the traditional general church. Like, oh, this could be dangerous. If you're not a therapist, if you're not a registered therapist, then something bad might happen. And of course, it could. It's true. It's a risk.
It probably did.
Right. And
for
like,
a few people.
Well, like what I said here, if you try something new, a miracle might happen. You know, yeah, something might go wrong. It's true. Also, now I want to talk about about church camps. And the camps that I've been to are Laurel, Maple, and Sunrise. So that's why I put them there. Not that there aren't other camps too. But, yeah. So, let me just talk a little bit about that. Okay, now, I talked to a friend who said that it was a conservative minister who started Laurel. So I have that here.
You didn't call it Laurel.
Right. What did he call it?
Weekend for young people.
Mm-hmm. What for young people?
New Church Weekend.
New Church Weekend. Okay, so it started out as a weekend, right?
Yeah. Well, they do have a conservative camp, don't they? Jacob's Creek?
Jacob's Creek. I made up Jacob's Creek post-it note, but I don't know where to put it.
That's way later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. It was like, okay, well, right there for now. Right. So going to church camps changed my life. The whole alternative general church, as I've experienced it, has been overwhelmingly positive as an influence on me. And when I first went to Maple, when I went to my first sharing group at Maple, it was a whole new world. I was saying to a friend, it made me feel as if I was part of the human race for the first time. And then I said, well, that's an exaggeration. And she said, don't sell it short. That was you. And it's like, it's true. And I realized that a lot of what I knew about human relationships and human intimacy came out of books. As a shy and socially awkward teenager who read all the time, I read books about people in love and people in friendship, and I cried over them. I knew I had all the equipment, you know. I was a person and I had everything I needed to be interpersonally connected. But it wasn't until I went to Maple that I realized, oh, this can happen to me, I can do this. And one of the things I loved about sharing groups was that there was a structure to it. You know, when I went to a party, I didn't know what to do because there wasn't a script, there wasn't a structure. I just like, But, you know, in sharing groups, we took turns talking about things, and there were rules about what you could say, what you were discouraged from saying. And I just felt like I'd come home, like it was feeding something, a hunger that I didn't even know that I had. I really can't overstate what an amazing experience that was. And I want to tell you a couple of other things that happened to me at my first Maple. And one was, we were doing some kind of group exercise. The person that I was one-on-oneing with coached me and said, you know, it's good when you're talking to someone, it's good to have eye contact. And I'm like, that was a simple thing. And it's like not something that I'd ever heard from my parents, not something I'd ever heard from my teachers. It's like, just here's something to help you function socially.
Huh.
I'm like, I found that in Maple. It just seems like a simple thing, and it was so great. And the other thing that happened at my first Maple was something where the alternative general church sort of came in unexpectedly. I was talking to an older girl. I had just been a sophomore and she had just been a senior, so she was 2 years older. And I confided in her that I had a crush on a teacher, which is like, duh, of course I had a crush on a teacher. That's the way I'm made, you know? And we talked a little bit about it, and she said, do you realize that that's wrong? And it's funny because at the time, I would have sort of expected myself to be, oh, yeah, I guess you're right, it's wrong. And I think I sort of disagreed with her. I mean, I sort of pretended to agree with her, let's put it that way. But even at the time, I realized that a schoolgirl crush by an unhatched, untouched, inexperienced 16-year-old is no threat to marriage. It's not like I wanted to run away with this guy or take his wife, you know, take him away from his wife. And I didn't even have any, and there was no graphic fantasy going on. It was a totally innocent, totally age-appropriate feeling. And I just feel like sometimes the traditional general church goes too far in instilling fear in people so that they will tread the straight and narrow in terms of sex and marriage. So that was an interesting thing to happen. And then, yeah, so oh yeah, and then the a cappella harmony at Laurel, that was like, man, there was something about the singing at Laurel Vespers that I'd never experienced before. And it's like, I want to talk a little bit about the whole, here we go. All right, well, we'll get to this. About the experience of spiritual community and in fact heaven that people have when they go to kid camps like Laurel. And they're like, well, what is it that makes it so amazing? And of course the sharing groups for me were a big part of it. The fact that we all get together to worship and eat and work. And somehow, once you've been there for a while, you start seeing people, you start looking at people with love. And you know, it's like you're told, give up judgment, but it makes it so much easier to give up judgment when you're at law for some reason. And the whole thing about, unconditional love and acceptance of self and others. And it's like, in some ways, it's counterintuitive that loving and accepting people and being loved and accepted is actually a great way to grow spiritually. Because, like, well, if you love and accept people unconditionally, aren't they going to go off and do all kinds of terrible things? Like, they're going to go break commandments and not be sorry for it? It's like, that's not the way it works, is what people found. That Carl Rogers, who I mentioned here, he was the guy who created something called client-centered therapy, and I don't have any of his books on the table. I had to decide to leave some behind. But he said, when people start looking into themselves and realizing what's going on, when they accept themselves, they start growing personally. That's what happens. That's the way people are made. That being loved and accepted helps people grow spiritually. And I'm not talking about grandiosity. I have to talk about, let's see where it is. The continuum concept. How many of you have read Jean Lee Loft's continuum concept?
What was it about?
Okay, well, it's about a female sociologist who went and spent time with the Iguana Indians in South America. I don't remember exactly where. And she observed how they treated their children, and she observed the health of their society. And she came up with a theory that she called the continuum concept, which is that human beings are evolved to expect a certain thing and thrive under a certain situation that involves things like the in-arms experience.
Holding your babies.
Yeah, holding your baby. It's like, she says, Iguana babies are almost always in arms for the first 6 months of their lives. And it's like, whoa. And they could do that. They're set up in a way that supports people doing that. They weren't always in their mother's arms. Sometimes grandmothers and siblings would take on the thing. But they were almost always in skin-to-skin contact with somebody else.
And was the traditional general church's view on that you should sleep train your babies or something?
Well, I don't know. I mean, let's put it this way. Back in the 30s when my mom was born, child rearing was very regimented and scientific.
Mm-hmm.
I have a book called Obstetrical Nursing, which I did not bring with me.
Ooh.
And I talk about it a little bit in the Healing Words anthology, about how children need to be trained to sleep in their own beds, to stay in their cribs and not cry. It showed pictures of babies wearing aluminum mitts or arm splints to keep them from sucking their thumb.
Oh no.
And bowel training beginning at a month of age.
That's not even gonna work.
That's got nothing to do with traditional general church.
Oh, okay.
There were plenty of traditional general church people who didn't go along with any of that.
There's someone who was born in the 30s and 40s, or who was raised in the 30s and 40s like my mom, and said, it is not all that many years ago that the common belief was explicitly stated something like this: a child is born bad, and we must break their will to bring them to God.
Oh.
Alice Miller writes in her books of the child raising guidelines that include beating, neglect, ridicule, abandonment, deprivation, isolation, humiliation. Anything goes in this service of breaking that will.
Oh,
And
no.
I mean, it sounds like it might be exaggerated, but I don't think it is.
That sounds terrible.
Yes, well, it's like some of those things actually happen to children. And I mentioned Alice Miller. I have Alice Miller's book, For Your Own Good, which my mom recommended to me. And it's about how child rearing practices are passed on from one generation to the next. And sometimes it's I got beaten as a child and I turned out fine, so it must be okay for me to beat my children.
No.
And you might not, I don't know exactly how much it has to do with practices of the general church in vernacular, but the fact is that the church is affected by what's happening in society. And that when the general church was being formed in the earlier decades of the 20th century, there was a lot of misogyny, racism, eugenics principles, that kind of thing that kind of got baked in. And I feel like I don't want to condemn the traditional general church for that, but the fact that they tended to hold on to some of those things when their time had passed is more of a problem. Because, so there were so many things that the general church tried to look at doctrine and create policies that were in harmony with what the writings said. And they came up with ideas like how women shouldn't talk in meetings, and if they wanted to say something, that they should put it in their husband's ear. And of course that left single women out of the picture. But, and the traditional general church has changed since then. I don't want to deny that. I want to emphasize that things have changed a lot for the better in terms of women being included. But, not enough, according to some of us.
Not enough.
But so I think that the traditional general church has come from such a hard-line conservative position, and the fact that it's moved toward the center. And we're complaining that it's not enough. It's like, but they have moved. They're just sort of trying to hold on to the rear guard, like, well, if we're 20 years to 50 years behind the times, then we're standing up for the writings, or whatever. Something like that. Now, I want to make sure I don't forget anything that's important here. Oh, I think I want to talk about this for a moment. These are things that the traditional and general church, traditional and alternative general church, have in common. That was Melanie's suggestion, but I put something down. And so I put down community, worship gathering, ritual, serving, arts and beauty, learning and reading and writing, self-transformation, and God does not condemn. And what I wanted to point out was that these things come in different flavors depending on whether you're looking at the traditional or the alternative. Like community for the traditional general church might mean you bring a casserole to someone who's sick or is having a baby.
There we go. Now I can see that.
Okay. And for the alternative general church, it might be more like sharing groups or spiritual growth groups.
Ah, spiritual growth groups.
Spiritual growth groups? Yeah, here we are. Spiritual growth groups. Yeah.
I knew they had to be there somewhere.
But also, I wanted to say something about different flavors of ritual. Okay, we're all familiar with the traditional cathedral service, which I think has changed somewhat since I went to it when I was a teenager and young adult. But there was a specific thing that I read in a Fade Out journal from the 50s that really struck me, and that was it was an isolated family, and the woman talked about what she did with her family, what they did to keep the Sabbath. Like they would, even though they were staying home for worship, they would all get dressed in their Sunday best. The boys would put on suits and ties. She would put on a girdle and stockings. And that made it so that reminded them that it was a special day. And if that worked for them, then fine. And a lot of people were very admiring of that. And it's like, and I was talking with my mom about it, and she's like, oh, it could have turned into, what if someone had decided that that was a doctrine that needed to be followed in the new church? Or, you go from, well, isn't that great? Oh, it's an example to emulate, to, well, everybody should do it that way. And nobody was saying that everybody should do that. I just want to tell you that. But, and then I think about ritual, the flavor of ritual in the alternative general church. One of the most powerful rituals I ever experienced was foot washing when we did that at camps. There was something so intimate about it, so tender, and so, well, it was interpersonal. It was something that we did, and it's like foot washing in our culture isn't a big deal because people don't always go around walking through the dust in sandals. Yeah. So, back in the days of Jesus, like, people would come in the house and they'd take off their sandals and their feet would need washing.
Yeah. And everyone has running water and...
Right, more or less. Everybody that we know has running water.
Can I say something?
Yes.
About washing? This is why the Super Bowl was amazing, not because of the game, but because of the ads. And there was a foot washing ad by a Christian group, not a church, just a group that wanted to say Jesus had it right when he did foot washing. And they showed different scenes of people foot washing in Philadelphia, wherever the city was, where they took the pictures. And it included homeless people who do have filthy feet. Not always, but people who can't, who don't have running water still. And who's your neighbor? It was wonderful.
Well, remember that I read something in the New York Times Magazine, which we put in excerpt of inspirations, about a man who wanted to help the homeless. And so he walked in there. It was a practicum for for his theological learning, you know, his theological study. He walked in and the nurse said, well, you're going to start by soaking feet. And so, you know, he put one foot in one tub and the other foot in the other tub. And that was something that became really valuable to him in a symbolic way as well as a physical way. And it's like, he struggled with trying to figure out better ways to help the homeless and help them not be homeless. And then he went back to his foot washing and he said, this is what we do while we're waiting for the world to change. This is what we do. And that was just really powerful to me.
Whether feet are dirty or not. Whether the feet are dirty or
Whether
not.
the feet are dirty.
You know, many homeless people are fastidiously clean than many of us.
Mhm.
But the foot washing, like you said so beautifully, is amazingly in the thing. And
Well, this particular guy who was talking about needed his feet soaked because he spent so much time on his feet and he had a circulatory problem. So yeah, right. I don't want to suggest that homeless people are generally unclean or anything like that. All right, let me just get this. Oh yeah, we had the S training. My Aunt Ruth did the S training and kind of brought it to Carnathan. And we had PET. My parents did PET. And it's basically about ways of interacting with your children that don't involve
Laying down the law?
laying down the law, right? Yeah, like saying what the rules are and expecting them to be obeyed. But PET is about figuring out what people's needs are and how everybody's needs can be met. So, you know, no conflict. And then there's RC. Dewey and I had an RC practice for a while. Dewey did an RC practice for a long time until he ran out of partners. I mean, there just weren't partners to do it with. And then there's the psychosynthesis, which is the practice that my mom came to after she took her, she got her degree in counseling psychology from Immaculata College. And part of that was being psychoanalyzed. And so her analyst, Sherry Franklin, helped her to heal from her mother's abuse, spiritual abuse. And then Sherry introduced her to psychosynthesis, which is a practice that combines spirituality and psychology and involves subpersonalities. And so my parents were both very involved in that for a number of years until Pinebrook closed, which is the place they did it. And my dad put out the newsletter, What's Growing On? Yep.
That's cute.
So, yeah. Oh yeah, and we had the women's symposia, the women's weekend, the women's and men gatherings, SWEAT, which is spiritual warfare effectiveness training. I just have to tell you, isn't that great? I just have to tell you, I went to, the men's gatherings were set up in a way, such a way that the Friday night event, they usually had a big name speaker come and talk. And the women would be invited for the Friday night event. And I went to several of those and I really enjoyed them. Probably the peak of that was when Robert Bly filled the entire gym of the Society building. And he was talking about men's woundedness, and he asked the Vietnam veterans to stand up.
Oh.
This was back in the 90s. A lot of wonderful things happened in the 90s. And sometimes we look back and go, well, what happened to all that stuff, you know? And my feeling is we may have moved on from the actual thing, but it still has an influence. The fact that all these things happened in the 90s still, it has done something for the general church.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Loving Arms Mission, which is Kent Rogers went to Nepal and started 2 orphanages, I believe at least 2. Well, they're not, I mean, they were family groups. They took 10 children, brought them into a home, and raised them as their family. And I was so impressed and awed by the way they laid down their lives for those children in Nepal. And they didn't try to change everything or solve everything. They just said, we're going to take 10 children and make them into our family. And then his sister took another 10 children, And every time, and they have this wonderful newsletter called The Lamppost, which I also kept. And every time I would read The Lamppost, I'd be like, where's my wallet? I want to give them some money. And it's like, I feel like one of the things that I learned from Loving Arms Mission was how effective they could be at fundraising. And they didn't have like the glossy brochures, and they didn't try to make people feel guilty for not giving. But they presented what they were doing in a way that just made me want to support them. It opened my heart. You know, the open heart is something that I really want to talk about as something that the alternative general church did for me, was open my heart. I learned how to cultivate compassion for others. I learned how to accept other people and help them in some ways, you know, and being, just not, well, I don't believe in the eternity of hell anymore. And that has opened my heart. And it's like, I felt like I needed to apologize for that on some level. Like, oh, I'm not really a good general church person if I don't believe in the eternity of hell. And it's like, I didn't realize until after I left the general church how much that was weighing on me. And it's like, it wasn't huge, okay? But there was just this little thing of, well, I guess I'm not really general church because I don't believe in that. But now I'm like, well, I'm alternative general church. Okay, time-wise. All right, I want to show you the rest of the posters.
Yay!
Yes. Okay. Okay, now here's some things that I was going to put over here. But I decided that they weren't really general church. I don't want to take everything that lines up with the alternative general church and say, well, this is alternative general church, because some of them are from other new church denominations, other Swedenborgian denominations.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Gathering Leaves, and of course, the alternative general church is a lot more at ease dealing with other denominations. Then we have the church that Dewey and I have been going to for over 20 years now, the Home Church, with Rosalind as our leader.
Yay, Roz!
And then we have the brunch, which originated as the Caritas brunch.
Roz is on the Zoom waving hi to us.
Right. Oh yeah, and I also wanted to mention that Caritas was a group of mostly women, but also men, who were trying to explore women's roles in the general church. And there was hope for a while that women could be ordained as ministers in the general church, but that didn't happen. But it's like maybe not in the traditional general church. So then we have that.
And to clarify, what actually happened was the traditional general church folks said, you got to disband this group or else a bunch of people are getting fired, right? That was what happened?
I don't know.
I heard that was what happened.
Yes, well, I know that there were people who were on Caritas and did the Caritas list, which was online, who got death threats.
Wow.
And
that's not acceptable at all.
Threatening to blow up buildings and things like that. So it's like there was a lot of fear. And I'm like, yeah.
Over the question of who's going to give church on Sunday.
Yeah.
Wow.
I guess. And then, yeah. Like there was tension around secrecy. And at one point, Rosalind said to somebody, Rosalind met somebody and they said, oh, you're not angry. Someone had she had been portrayed as this strident, angry person.
Yeah, well, feminists are often given, anger. It's a thing, when you don't like a group, you call them angry. So sometimes black people are called, angry. That's an angry black man to make you, think that they're unreasonable and you can't talk to them. So they do the same thing with feminists.
Yeah. So, there's tension. And then, of course, Creekside is no more, as far as I know.
Oh, so sad.
So
I loved it.
Creekside was an independent new church congregation that met at the Creekside place. And there were some tension around, you know, women preached there, and then general church ministers would come, and then that was discouraged, and whatever. It was tough.
There was also lay preaching too, so that was kind of
Oh,
great.
yeah, right. Lay, 5 men and women. Now, when I thought about putting up the Swedenborg Scientific Association, I was like, well, why would I put that up as in harmony with the alternative general church? And I kept like, oh, I realized that one of the main reasons for that was because from the Swedenborg Scientific Association, I always felt that my scholarship was respected. So respect for female scholarship.
Very important.
It's like, it was through the SSA that I got on the map as a Swedenborgian scholar. And so, yeah, it was very cool. I wanted to, I might as well mention what I think of as traditional treasures. And that is, you know, I had a wonderful time at the academy. I had an even more wonderful time at Burnett College. My middle daughter had a wonderful time at the Academy Girls' School. And then classical music, choral singing, and worship. It's like, I love the contemporary songs too. But if I had to choose one or the other, I would pick the classical music every time. Like, it's a wonderful thing. And then I put down Don Rose's New Church Life. And I was like, I didn't realize how good we had under Don Rose, because Don was willing to give the Alternative General Church a say in New Church Life. And he worked with me and with my mom, and he welcomed what we had to say.
He was on staff at Laurel.
What's that?
He was on staff at Laurel.
Yes, he was. And and then when other editors took on New Church Life, it wasn't as welcoming. So I just want to say, Don, thank you. You know, he's gone now. He did some wonderful things at Laurel. Let me talk a little bit about Theta Alpha Journal. As you guys know, I edited Theta Alpha Journal. It was 9 years that I edited Theta Alpha Journal. And that the traditional and the alternative wings of the general church were in conversation in Theta Alpha Journal. It's like, in New Church Life, the alternative got a hearing because Don allowed it. In Theta Alpha Journal, Theta Alpha is an organization that is based in the general church, but it is financially and organizational distinct. It's not part of the hierarchy. And that meant that it was, as editor, I could follow a personal vision with more freedom than I otherwise would have. And so you could read people, you know, 50 years ago people would say one thing, and 20 years ago they would say something different. Like there was a consciousness, you know, people going to Laurel and feeling like they were being transformed. I mean, like, generations of people have gone to Laurel and come back on a path of transformation. And if that's not influence, I don't know what is. But one of the things that another of the editors of Com Council said, which really struck me, was page 4. It's on page 4. He says, "It's humbling for me to pause and think of the contempt with which I have scorned so many of the ideas I hold so dear today. I wasn't ready for them then, and could only listen to them once I had somehow become ready." He was talking about the first Advent and about how if he was there back then when Jesus was alive in this world, he probably would have been skeptical. And it made me think about, so what is it that makes people ready for other ideas? And one thing is going to Laurel and doing things that open your heart, sharing groups and things. And it's like, what leads you to that in the first place? And this same person said in other articles in Com Council that he had a sort of a malaise in his life. Like, he felt unfulfilled and unconnected, and he didn't know what to do about it. And he gravitated to people who seemed to embody what he was looking for, and ended up going to Laurel and doing spiritual growth groups. And from one from one perspective, you might say, well, that was a kind of brainwashing. I mean, I think there are people who think of what happened to people when they did those things as brainwashing, because they, like, apparently rejected a lot of the things that they had believed. So, but then when you actually experiencing that, what I call the opening of the heart, and you feel like you, that's the thing, the whole self is accepted, not just the good parts, not just the dressy parts, not just the part that goes to Sunday dinner. Right, like one of the questions I was thinking of was, would someone bring a casserole to someone who's going through a tough divorce? I mean, you get casseroles if you're sick, or when someone dies, or if you have a baby. But if you're going through a tough divorce, do you get a casserole? Yeah.
I mean, does it depend if someone thinks it's your fault or not that you're getting divorced?
That's the thing, is people seem to have a need to make a judgment about it.
Like, that's the traditional problem.
Like, marriage is like the last at the end of life. And I like, so I put on the bottom of this list, right, I put issues and questions. And some of the issues and questions we have are about premarital sex, divorce, and I put the stigma thing here because I feel like the stigma around divorce is one of the big phenomena in the traditional general church. And birth control and abortion, which can be more private, I guess.
Okay, we have a hand up. I don't want to interrupt you, but Lori.
Oh, go ahead. All right, what hand?
Lori.
Yes.
About the stigma around divorce.
Yes.
I interviewed by the then, I guess he was I don't know if he was the pastoral guy or the actual principal of the Vernacular Church School. I think someone else hired me, but I had to go talk to a minister about the reasons for my divorce, because someone in the congregation had objected to my presence in the grade school because I was divorced. And they wanted to make sure that the grounds were appropriate.
Wow. Yeah, well, it was also a double standard because we had a divorced minister teaching our A&C conjugal love class. And I was like, he's divorced. What is going on?
Well, they knew better how to prevent it.
Yeah. But apparently that wasn't his fault, so.
Right, it wasn't his fault.
Oh, well.
Well,
That's why.
I just feel like sometimes you marry the wrong person.
Yes, that's no fault divorce. I think it makes a better law and a better culture.
Uncover the rest of those.
Okay, good.
All right. Now, I feel like I put these under mainstream, journey groups, marriage conferences, and helping children in crisis. Because the journey groups, they are a general church, they come from the general church, the central office. But I think there's a recognition that group work is really powerful. And they're like, well, let's do some groups. And of course, they had to monetize it by selling the books. You know, that's what they do. And marriage conferences, which have some wonderful things that happen at the marriage conferences. And then I thought, like, I'm not even sure if the Helping Children in Crisis thing was for a church that was supposed to be a new church or not, but I just felt like it was a very generous outreach by the general church, and I did want to support that, so I did. Now, so then we have some of the other questions that come up. The paradox about love of self. Like, we're always dealing with that. It's like, well, Swedenborg says that ourself, without God, we're nothing but evil, and that love of self is evil, except, you know, so it's like, So it's really easy to fall down on the love of self is evil side of the equation. And then when we have unconditional love and acceptance, you go, but. It kind of breaks their brain, you know? And then I saw someone in New Church Life say, priests aren't social workers. And I'm like, well, wait a minute.
What?
Maybe they can be. Maybe they are. And this same minister who talked about the writings and how how difficult it is when you don't believe them all, also said, well, this is why we don't have charities, like we don't support charities as ministers in the general church, because, well, we have a focus on teaching the truth and leading to the good of life, and we don't want to take away from that focus. I do have to say that I have always appreciated that the general church did not preach politics from the pulpit, tried to kind of distance itself from political issues, and I don't know how much that's true today. But I always appreciated that. And I also think that traditional alternative, it does fall down a little bit on the, more than a little, on the conservative liberal side, but it's not exact. And it's not exactly official and unofficial. It's just two entities that I see.
Subcultures.
Mm-hmm. So, and then, the which doctrines are official? Like, that's something that I had to deal with when I left the general church in 2022. And it's like we got this article straight from the bishop's office about standing for marriage in today's world. And I was like, okay. Like, for the past 10 years, I've been like, well, is that a deal breaker? I guess not. Is that a deal breaker? I guess not. Is this a deal breaker? Yes. This is a deal breaker, and this is when I'm going to draw. This is where I'm going to draw the line, because I felt like there was no room for me to be a queer ally and a general church member. But now I can say there's no room for me to be a queer ally and a traditional general church member. I can still be a part of the traditional general church.
Or the alternative general church.
And also, mistaking the map for the journey is something that I think that the general church traditional sometimes falls prey to. And I remember one of my favorite ministers at Laurel giving a talk in the morning. He was sitting in a chair holding a map. I'm getting ready to go on a trip. And he's reading the map. And he shakes the map and said, why am I not going anywhere? Because he thought the map was going to take him on the journey. And I think that sometimes what happens, like reading the writings is the journey. It's instructions for the journey, but it isn't actually the journey. It's part of the journey, but it's not the part where you actually get in the car or get on the horse or start walking. And I feel like the journey itself is something that the alternative general church has helped to bring into focus. Okay. Oh man. And which is the fringe and which is the center? You know? There's an article in Connections too, which is a wonderful book, and it's a wonderful article called Women on the Fringe. And it's about a woman who struggled, well, 30 years ago, struggled with the traditional general church and how it didn't meet her needs and didn't accept her as her whole self. And it's like, so she felt like she was on the fringe. And my sense is center, fringe. I have some, yeah, center. That the alternative general church can be just as central, just as much of the center as the traditional general church, because it's a real thing. So I don't want us to feel like we're around the edge holding on by our fingernails or something like that, whatever. I mean, I'd like to encourage people to have a different way of looking at that.
It's confusing. I know among some new people, they weren't aware that we didn't have women ministers. I think this was back in 2014 when we were doing the survey. And they were like, I didn't realize this was what I signed up for with this church. Because they'd only experienced, I think, something that was the newest experiment at the time, which was New Church Live. And so these people were like drawn to see this new interesting thing, and they hadn't been in the church before. And then they were like finding out about all the traditional part, and it was suddenly like, wow! That's a problem.
Right, yeah. So I hear people who go to churches out west and they decide they want to join the church, and then they get some material from the central office and they go, no, this is the church. And so she called this de-evangelization.
My hand up again.
Okay. Oh, yes, Lori.
Yeah, Leon James. Anyone heard of him?
Yep.
Yes.
He was a professor at University of Hawaii, and he was still teaching when I was there. He taught graduate courses called Spiritual Psychology. And if you start from the assumption that there is a divine being, and that the divine being has an interest in the well-being of humanity, he taught the writings as the guidebook for how to be a human being. Not as a religious, he wasn't preaching. He was just saying, if you start from, there is a God and he cares about us, this is the information that he provided to help you become the best human being you could become.
Mhm.
And he taught that in a public university. It was a graduate course. He invited my youngest daughter to sit in. She sat in a couple times, but it found it very intimidating to be an 18-year-old sitting with 22 and 25-year-olds who were less familiar with the writings than she was. So she didn't stay, but she let me know about it. And I love the idea that the writings tell you, like your dishwasher manual, this is what I made you to do. This is how you will do it the best.
Mhm.
So you can choose to read the directions and follow it, or you can choose to never read the directions. But I love the approach that a caring divinity said, I made you guys, this is how I built you to work best.
Mhm.
Not, you're going to hell if you don't.
Yes, right.
You're going to be happier if you do. And I find that a very helpful approach in my own life, and when I consider what other people are up to, I can look at some folks and say, wow, they missed the directions.
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, there's just a couple more things I wanted to cover before I open it up for more discussion.
Yeah, what are those last two Post-it notes?
Right.
They're hiding something.
Oh yeah, I know her.
Right, well, and at some point we want to like pan the camera over closer so people can get
Yeah.
the whole thing. And so I wanted to talk about the money talks issue. I feel like supposing the Alternative General Church was its own organization, how would that play out? Would its tenets become dogma? Would it become concerned with money the way the traditional General Church is? And it's like, we sort of have a luxury to be flexible because we have this relatively rigid framework to work on. And it's like, and Dewey asked me, well, how would that be different from convention? I'm like, I don't know much about convention, except that it has some different ideas. But more open, more inclusive. But I feel like the Alternative General Church has gotten a certain amount of energy and drive and passion from the fact that it has pushed back on the traditional General Church. It's like, well, we have this wonderful church and there's some things about it that we really object to. And we want to do something different. And I think that that's given it an energy and a focus, which has been good. And I want to mention backlash. I feel like some people wonder, why is it that the official General Church can move forward a little bit, but then kind of not really commit, not really follow through. And I think that there's one reason for that is that sometimes when the General Church moves in a direction that the traditional faction doesn't like, there's pushback. And I know that there are some specific examples of that. I think I'll just mention one, and that is when there was one minister who said something in his pastor's box in the Vernacular Post about how, as a General Church minister, he can't officiate at same-sex marriages, but he still encourages them to solemnize their union in some way. And boy, he got read the Riot Act and ended up sort of walking it back, and then he got hot and heavy from his kids. So it's like, there's always somebody, I mean, there's always someone standing at the gate saying, this far and no farther, I think. And I wanted to say something else about the LGBTQ inclusion, and that is, back in Comm Council, which was 30 years ago, there was one person who occasionally would write a letter having to do with LGBT issues, mostly being gay. And it's like the society and the people at Comm Council weren't really ready to discuss that yet. He didn't get a lot of feedback about that. But Comm Council held a space for it to express these things that would become like germane, become central in later decades. So I think that's important. So, oh yeah, Center of Fringe, money talks, hard teachings. What can I say? I sometimes think that some people say that the hard teachings are given for us to test our loyalty and test our obedience. And then my daughter said, well, actually, I think that the Lord wanted Abraham to say, no, I'm not going to sacrifice my son on an altar. That's gross. You know, so you can look at it another way. I wanted to take uncover this.
Yeah, what's under there?
Yeah, uncover this. This is a minister put up a suggestion for what he called a General Church Conscience Committee. And I don't think there's been any movement on that because, like, well, what could they do? I mean, but I realized that when I was putting this together, that the General Church Conscience Committee could be seen as the alternative General Church holding the traditional General Church accountable. That it was supposed to be an idea where people could bring their complaints and come together and like go in a group to possibly in person visit the people in charge and say, what about this? We object to this. We think it's not compassionate or whatever.
The lack of a feedback system within the general church from the congregation to the leadership seems to be sort of an ongoing problem that I wish would be addressed.
Anyway, I think it's past 11:30, so I may not have covered everything I wanted to talk about, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions about the posters or anything else they'd like to bring up.
Yeah, if you'd like to see something, I will try to zoom in on anything. We also...
You could zoom in on each one individually for
Yeah, that'd be great.
so that we could look at them in the video if we wanted to.
Yeah, I'll probably take photographs of them to edit into the
That's
video.
a good idea, right.
Okay.
But just
panning down on.
gonna
the
pan
traditional
down this one. I don't know how fast you guys can read.
Oh, Kathy has a hand up.
Okay, Kathy, what would you like to say?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Linda. This is just a beautiful amount of work. And it is a wonderful display of the alternative church and how alive and vibrant it has been. You know, a lot of us kind of feel like the general church has been so conservative and it's, you know, seems to be going even more that direction in some ways. And it's just beautiful to see, especially with all the colors and the beautiful writing. It's just such a beautiful presentation overall of how live and vibrant that alternative church within the general church is. And I guess my thoughts now are, I am on the Gay Straight Alliance group. I am in that group on Facebook, and
Yeah.
I'm just very aware of the amount of pain that's been expressed because of the last few things that have happened, you know, the last few, you know, things that have come from the leadership. And
Yeah.
I guess I have mixed feelings, like, how can, you know, on one hand, it's like, how can we continue a friendly conversation, and also how can we really learn to understand each other better. But at the same time, how can we underline how serious this is? I mean, we've gone through phases where a lot of people have left the church because of the women in the ministry issue. I think we're going to go through another mass exodus if something doesn't happen, if the communication doesn't get better. And, you know, if you're in that group, you've seen the pain, and you've seen, you know, what kinds of things have happened for people. And I guess that's my biggest concern right now. Young people are, a lot of them are just absolutely amazed that, you know, there's the belief that we're supposed to take the writings literally. And it's like, wait, that was just taken for granted when I was a kid. That is not taken for granted. I think it's actually more the opposite with the younger generations.
Well, the younger generations cannot take any source of truth at all for granted, because there's a lot of information poisoning and propaganda and viral marketing campaigns that are fake and, you know, stuff like that now. So if you were like, this is okay, but everything else is not, that would be a little unusual.
Yeah. Well, I think the general church doesn't realize how far away from taking things literally the younger people are. And when I say younger, there's a lot of generations younger than me at this point.
Yep.
So, anyway. Anyway, just a couple thoughts, and again, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the nice words. Okay, I see Lori wants to say something.
Yeah, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I've been out of town for a while, so I have a lot on my mind.
A lot to notice.
I would like to submit that pedophilia is a much better candidate for the abomination which cannot be named.
Oh, yes.
That conservatives in the church choose to interpret as homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Because teaching for 18 years on the west side of Oahu, I saw a lot of the outcomes of pedophilia that were negative. Not many negative outcomes of homosexuality in terms of the gay teachers that I worked with who were doing productive work on behalf of God, many of them.
Yep. Yeah, well, one problem is the...
adopting children nobody else would adopt, and living righteous lives.
I mean, it's been brought to my attention that one of the problems is that some of the older generation can't distinguish between consensual gay partnership and non-consensual situations where a man abuses a little boy. So there's a little education, I think, that would go a long way.
Association between pedophilia and homosexuality. That's not...
But also, it's hard to even get that to happen because they keep censoring us. Like, for example, this talk in the Post is listed as, like, I think they call it, like, building community or something. Like, it had a
Finding spiritual community.
Finding spiritual community. It had a totally different name from the actual name, which was the alternative, the traditional and the alternative general church.
The phrase alternative general church apparently made people pretty nervous.
I was like, yeah, I guess they thought we might be suggesting a split or something, but I don't know.
The other I object to is the opposition to corrective surgery.
Yeah, I mean, it's just...
People are born how they're born. And if they want to fix something about the disjunct between how they were born and how they can successfully operate in the universe, whose business is that person's?
That should be another dimension on there. Like, like things, your business is everyone's business versus your business is your own business.
Yeah, well that's
At
like...
least in the corner, blind as a bat, if I couldn't get remediation.
I think is this a commentary on the trans issue?
Might be.
Possibly.
Possibly. Maybe. We can't say for one reason or another because we might get banned. I don't know.
Hey, there's a lot of things that we fix now that never used to get fixed because we didn't have the God-given scientific knowledge to do it. Or the God-given scientific knowledge that it was necessary or possible that it was necessary.
Well, the great thing about the internet is it aggregates all these people together who would have like a rare statistically, way of being that wasn't common in a small community. So maybe you would be one of the few gay people in your community, but now there's a whole community and you can online and you can find other people. And that didn't used to happen. And before that could happen, you'd just be an isolated person having your own weird experience that nobody else was having. And that must have felt terrible. Because none of the things that people would be talking about would apply to you.
I have another thought.
Okay, Kathy?
Do I need to raise my hand? I'm already talking. Yeah, but Facebook has brought a lot of good as far as, letting people connect and find support. I would also just put out there that I wonder if the divide has gotten greater, unfortunately, in some ways, though.
The what has gotten, the divide? Is that what you said?
The divide, yeah, because, well, definitely I think it's gotten worse as far as Democrats and Republicans because we are not actually having conversations with our friends who are on the other side. And when you have a conversation in person, you see the whole person, you don't see the one issue. And I'm kind of, as much as I love the group that we're, that is a support the Gay Straight Alliance, it concerns me that it's missing that element of in-person and the whole person. And, we do have, events and stuff, but I would love to see more in-person communication happening about these issues. And Linda, what you're describing that happened in the 90s, that was before the internet.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
I know, there's a reason why some of this stuff is going away. So sad.
Yeah, so anyway, I guess my question is, what was lost and how can we get that back? And maybe just even a question to put out there, if this church is so great, wouldn't it be great if we could be a little bit of a beacon for how to talk to each other? So many people are having a hard time, bridging that divide. Wouldn't it be great if the general church, instead of just following the pattern that everybody is doing in this country of not talking to each other, wouldn't it be great if the leaders of the church really made some strides in communicating not just this is how we're going to do things, but, what is it that you want to say? And I think one thing they really can't hear, for whatever reason, is this problem isn't going to go away, and also the people in the Gay Straight Alliance, you're not going to budge them on their beliefs. I really think they can budge people, they can change their beliefs, and they're not going to.
Yeah, and insulting people from the pulpit isn't going to do it.
Okay, we have a comment from the chat. It says, I think we need to consider interfaith training. I highly recommend the book Getting to the Heart of Interfaith. Look up on YouTube The 3 Interfaith Amigos. That sounds like a cool channel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, listen,
Thank you, Amy.
I need to wrap this up.
Yes.
I also want to say, the people who are actually here in the room, please feel free to look at the materials on the table.
We also have coffee.
Oh, yeah, we have coffee?
Oh, coffee?
And thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And thank you, Linda, for being our speaker
All right,
today.
right.